if you really want to increase minorities in hockey, whether it's on the ice, in those roles behind the scenes, you simply have to start getting more players and help them move up that food chain and play at a high level.
What's up, everyone? I'm Anson Carter, and you're watching Hockey Culture, the place where we try to change the culture of hockey, one interview at a time. And today's guest we have joining us, Tarik El-Bashir from The Athletic. Tarik, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Anson.
This is perfect timing because the Caps just got eliminated and they just replaced their head coach, Todd Reirden. I want to hear your thoughts about that. And did you see that coming?
Yeah, I did see it coming, Anson. If you look at the big picture, Todd Reirden inherited a Stanley Cup champion. He guided them to back-to-back Metropolitan Division titles. I mean, that's a really tough division. But the success in the postseason simply wasn't there. They got upset by Carolina last year in 7 games. And then the team came out like gangbusters, almost like they were embarrassed of what happened against the Hurricanes. And they were the best team in the league around Christmas time this season. And then they just collapsed, and it's kind of inexplicable. No one's really been able to figure out or pinpoint what happened. But the last 20 games were really a referendum, in my opinion, on Reirden's leadership and where things were headed. They were a barely 500 team. They were allowing more goals per game than any other team in the league, which just is not going to get it done. And then there was, of course, the coronavirus stoppage. And 5 months later, there was some optimism that maybe they could turn this around. And as it turned out, it was the same old. It was the same Capitals team that couldn't get it together in the second half of the season. Went up against Barry Trotz and his detailed defensive-oriented system. And, to excuse the pun here, but they just fell right into New York's trap and just got frustrated. And as the frustration really set in, you could tell they didn't have any answers. And, one thing, Anson, that really stood out to me was even Reirden said this, but a number of players noted it as well during their time in Toronto. It didn't seem like everyone was pulling on the rope at the same time with the same amount of force, for a full 60 minutes. When you're in the playoffs, as weird as these playoffs are, and you're not getting max effort from a veteran-laden team, you guys are asking questions. So once they got bounced, I kind of knew that the writing was on the wall, and I knew what was going to happen.
Now, do you think it's because they got bounced in the first round, or they got bounced to their former coach, Barry Trotz?
That certainly did not help. It did not help the situation. That said, we talked to Brian McClellan, the general manager, yesterday, and that question was asked to him point blank, and he said no. Do you believe him or not? I tend to believe him because I was there. I was there during the breakup with Barry Trotz, and it was messy. It was multi-layered. There are a lot of fans out there on Twitter going, "You should have paid Barry." Okay, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with that given the results, but you make decisions as a manager based on the information that's in front of you. And Trotz had been there for 4 years. The team had almost fired him during that regular season, the year they went and won the Cup. He won the Cup. It triggered an extension in his contract. He said, "Guys, this isn't enough money. I just led you guys to your first Stanley Cup." The Cap said, "Okay, well, we can pay you, but we're not giving you 5 years." And that was pretty much the end of their relationship. The players, I'm told, pretty much signed off on Reirden. They wanted to keep some continuity. They wanted to run it back with the same group of players and mostly the same staff, minus Barry Trotz. As we found out here, Barry Trotz was the biggest ingredient there, and they weren't able to get over the hump, and we are where we are.
Well, it feels like I watch the Stanley Cups, right? And you see the signs of a good coach, and that's what the Capitals are looking for. And for me, a good coach is able to make good players great and have your great players take their game to a whole different level. Trotz did that while he was in Washington, and you look at the coaches that are out there right now, Laviolette, Gallant, Babcock. I mean, who do you think would be a good fit there? Because I don't see the Washington Capitals bringing some like Jeremy Colton, like the Chicago Blackhawks did, a young, inexperienced guy in when you've got players in that room that have rings. But also, they let Trotz go because of money. And Laviolette, Babcock, and Gallant, I don't see those guys coming cheap. So who do you think would be the best fit there in Washington going forward?
Anthony, if you are to believe what McClellan told us yesterday, and he's a pretty straight shooter, he indicated that he's not going to be constrained by money. They understand the window is closing. I mean, it's cracked open by like this much right now. Alex Ovechkin turns 35 next month. Everyone around him is getting older as well. The division itself is getting better. They've got to maximize these last few years of Ovechkin's career with Nicholas Backstrom and John Carlson. They've got to get it together. And I think if they had a little bit of urgency, they got a lot of urgency right now. I mean, there is a red, flashing light going off in the Capitals facility right now. They know that the time is now, this year or next, to win a second Stanley Cup during the Ovechkin era. So I do think they're going to go with experience, and I don't think they're going to go, that's too expensive. I think they're going to find a way to get one of those guys. I would expect McClellan, after some internal discussions here over the next few days with ownership and maybe some key leaders on the team, to reach out to Laviolette and to reach out to Gallant. And, we always talk about connections. McClellan and Gallant were teammates in Detroit back in the early 90s. So, it doesn't matter if it's the NFL or Major League Baseball or hockey or whatever. When you're trying to figure out who's going to get hired, just go back and kind of trace that tree. And you can usually trace it back to a time when the guys had a comfort zone and knew each other before. I'm not saying it's going to be Gallant, but that's something to keep in mind. I've heard Bruce Boudreau's name thrown out there. He of course was the architect of that Young Guns team. When Ovechkin scored 65 goals, and they weren't playing a whole lot of defense, but they were a heck of a lot of fun to watch. Boudreau's older now. He's coached Anaheim. He's coached Minnesota. He understands the importance of coaching defense now and coaching a structured system. Will they reach out to him? I can tell you, I've been through a few coaching searches with this team, and they are very detailed and they are very thorough, and they are going to call a lot of people. So I don't expect this job to be filled, Anson, here in the next few days. I think it's going to be a few weeks. They're going to take their time, make sure they get their right guy, because they got to get the right guy. I mean, they only have a year or two left of this core in its prime, so they're going to be very careful to make sure they get their man.
We were the most dialed-in people when it comes to Washington Caps hockey, and you're talking about that coaching tree or the background that McClellan's had. Well, he meant to burn that tree down because he had that history with Todd Reardon go back to Bowling Green.
Yeah, he did.
It's time for him to start planting some new trees. I want to take it back to 2005, where before that you started skating at Wheaton Ice Rink. You took your dream job as the Washington Post beat writer for the Washington Capitals. Man, what was that like? I mean, first of all, you're a reporter walking into a hockey locker room, probably the only black dude in the room. What was that like walking in?
Well, I'll tell you, going back to the beginning, I started playing hockey in Silver Spring, Maryland, like you said, fell in love with the game. I played other sports, but there was something about hockey that really kind of pulled me in, and, it kind of became a lifelong obsession for me. After some other jobs in the business, I got my first break at the New York Times covering the Islanders. And unfortunately, I spent more time in a Long Island courtroom. That was back during the John Spano days when, there was all sorts of stuff going on with ownership. But then I got the opportunity after coming to the Washington Post, my hometown paper, the paper I grew up reading. I mean, I grew up reading Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon and all those great beat writers that they've had over the years. And after a couple of years of paying my dues covering local sports, the boss called me in and said, "I want you to cover the Capitals." I said, "I've been waiting for this day," and it was great. And I seized the moment. I loved it. I covered a Capitals team. The coolest thing about it was the timing of it all, and you couldn't have planned this out. They gave me the beat, funny enough, during the 04-05 season that never was. So I'm just sitting there, covering basically Gary Bettman press conferences for about a year, because as we know, there was no hockey played that year. But the cool thing was I got in on the ground floor with Alex Ovechkin. I was there the day he got drafted. I was at the draft party. I got to see that this was going to be a special kid. So I got to kind of cover his entire career, the ups and downs. For him individually, it's been mostly ups, but there were some down moments there in his career, some doubt and some not so great years. And, I got to chronicle all that for my hometown paper. And when I tell you, I have been unbelievably blessed to have this opportunity and to stay in the same town. I've worked for the Washington Post. I've covered the team for NBC Sports Washington, and I now cover the team for The Athletic. And to be able to cover the sport you love, the team you grew up watching, and that you've always got your eyes on, you've always had your eyes on, and to be able to do that in the same city, the same market for almost 2 decades now, incredible blessing.
I mean, was that a goal of yours? I mean, you grew up, you had a poster of Scott Stevens, drink your milk in your bedroom.
I did.
Did you actually see that going forward in your future as being a Capitals beat reporter?
Not really. It's funny. I wanted to be you, man. I wanted to be a player. Like I wanted to play, but as I started college, I went to Howard University, and one of my first classes was in the School of Communications, and the guest speaker was Michael Wilbon. And he came in and he told us what he did for a living. And I went, okay, I grew up reading the sports page. My hockey career is pretty much over. That sounds pretty awesome. You get paid to go to events and to interview players and break news and tell stories and, kind of chronicle, a team's existence a year, year by year. And I said, that's what I want to do. And so it was funny. I went to Mike Wilbon after he spoke and I said, Mr. Wilbon, you've inspired me. This is what I want to do. He gave me his card. He said, give me a call sometime. I called him like the next day and left a message for him. And he said, listen, come in and I'm going to set you up with our sports editor. You come in and, put on a jacket, look presentable. And, I go in and they said, look, here's how it works. Kids, that want to get in this business, you come in, you answer phones, you do proofs, you do golf agate, you do all the stuff that no one else has time for or wants to do. And slowly but surely, you're going to work your way up. And so I did that as a junior and senior for when I was at Howard. And, years later, it paid off in a full-time job.
How connected are the people in Washington, D.C. with the history of black hockey players? I mean, I know that you've been a beat reporter there forever. Has that been something that – because forever D.C. was known as Chocolate City.
Yeah.
And you talk about all the black players that have come through D.C.
Yeah.
Mike Marson, Bill Riley, myself, Mike Greer. The list goes on and on. Is there a connection there with the community, with the black players, or is it something that's now starting to come to fruition as we start to focus more on the history and the diversity of the game of hockey within D.C.?
I think it's always been there, Anson. I'm sure you felt it a little bit. I mean, the one thing about going to a Capitals game, whether it was at the Capitol Center or it's at the downtown arena, Capital One Arena, you look around the crowd, you're going to see more black and brown faces probably than anywhere else in the National Hockey League. And part of the reason is because that's what you have in the city. That's the population. But the fans in D.C., the black fans, they've been there since the beginning. There have been a lot that have been there since the beginning. And there is a proud history of black players on the Capitals. And I do feel like there's always been that connection. And I'm sure you made some stops over at Fort DuPont in Southeast Washington, which is the home of the oldest minority hockey club in the whole country. And the Capitals have tried to really have a connection with that community over there. That rink has, had some financial struggles in the past. Ted Leonsis has stroked checks to make sure that it stays open. When they won the Stanley Cup, one of the first places they visited was Fort DuPont in Southeast Washington. So that connection has always been there. There's a lot of room for improvement. And, one thing the Capitals announced recently, really at the start of this playoff run, was they are going to really commit themselves to diversity in hockey and expanding that diversity and also ending systemic racism. I wrote a big story about 2 weeks ago on that. They have a number of initiatives that they have launched. And, it's funny. I've written about these types of things before. And sometimes, there are teams that, or groups that'll kind of give lip service, say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It doesn't sound that way with the Caps to me. It sounds like they really are going to invest. And they understand now, after George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, that, there is an enormous room for improvement. And they are going to try and connect better with the minority community in DC. And one of the things that really stood out to me was they're going to have a fund that players on the team and members of the community can contribute to help Black players who show promise and are really into it, but need that extra, guidance and also financial support, because as we know, hockey's really expensive, to kind of help them move up the food chain.
Yeah, that'll be the Capital Impact Fund that you're talking about. I think that's a great thing. Also, they're doing things to access the game in terms of building more arenas. Now, you and I both know you have a child that plays the game of hockey. Hockey's not cheap. I mean, what's your experience has been like being a father now that your child plays the game, and all of a sudden you're stroking checks? Like, now you could understand why there's a lack of diversity in the game of hockey, because it's so expensive.
It's really incredible, Anson. I know that, growing up in Toronto for you, it was probably expensive, but not like it is down here. And part of it, because like you said, ice time is so hard to come by. There are several more rinks that are online now than when I grew up playing in this area. But still, I mean, they aren't on every corner like they are in Ontario. Right. So that's part of the reason for the cost. And look, I have a 16-year-old player. He plays on one of the better teams in town. And I've been able to watch him grow. And I've seen a number of minority players that started with him, let's say at 6, 7 years old. A lot of them have been kind of bled off for one reason or another. And a lot of times it's simply the finances. AAA hockey in Washington, D.C., once you factor in travel and $300 sticks and $600 skates, you don't have to get all that stuff, but it's kind of, there's a little bit of peer pressure to get all that stuff. You're talking of $20,000 for a season, in that range, depending on how you travel. That's really that's a lot of money. But also, because of what I do, I also have the connections and not only the resources, but I know who to talk to and what summer teams to put my kid on and what spring teams to get them to put them on and what tryouts and what coaches to talk to. If you're a minority and you have a son or daughter who's really into hockey, you may not know who to reach out to, because, hockey may not be something that comes, it's not something that you grew up with, right? So you don't really know who to reach out to. And it sounds like the Capitals are really going to invest, not only financially, but they're going to try and build a strong community with that Fort DuPont rink, and try to help elevate some black and brown players and help them get to that next level. I'll tell you a funny story. My son's a forward. He wore 76 on his back for a number of years. He's recently switched over to a forward's number, but he wore 76 because of PK Subban. I mean, he loves Nathan McKinnon and Alex Ovechkin, but at the same time, there was a guy on TV who looked like him. That inspired him. He has a Subban jersey on his wall. He's got a Subban poster on his wall. Yesterday he was wearing a Subban T-shirt. I mean, it's because he can connect. And it's time for if you really want to increase minorities in hockey, whether it's on the ice, in those roles behind the scenes, you simply have to start getting more players and help them move up that food chain and play at a high level.
Yeah, and a big part of that, I believe, is through street hockey, too. You're talking about accessing the game, what the Washington Capitals have done. Their partnership with the D.C. public schools have helped introduce the game of hockey to 48,000 kids, 110 schools through street hockey. Like, everyone might not be able to afford to play the game of ice hockey, but I knew when I was growing up in Toronto, street hockey was my game. I was a street hockey wizard, and I loved the game so much. Eventually, I took it to the ice, but I think we could increase the number of kids, diverse number of kids towards the game of hockey through just introducing to playing street hockey, which you can play in some states 12 months out of the year.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, yesterday I took my 16-year-old to a roller rink in our neighborhood that was built by the Capitals. It actually has the Capitals logo on the surface. It's got the Capitals logo on the scoreboard. It's got a couple of ads for Capitals Youth Hockey and other things. So the branding is inescapable, and it's right in the middle of the neighborhood. It's open to anybody. Anybody who wants to go can go put on rollerblades or not. I mean, my son was on one side of the rink with rollerblades on, but the other side of the rink was just neighborhood kids with Milek sticks and balls, just having a great time. And they've done that in a number of locations, including some locations where the minority count is higher. And so I think they're moving in the right direction. And it certainly sounds like they are committed to making a difference. It's going to be interesting to see. We have seen the Alex Ovechkin effect. We saw what happened when he burst onto the scene in 05-06. You trace back, 8 years into the future, and you can see how big youth hockey exploded in this area. Because that's about how much time it took for, dads who were into stick and ball sports to see this guy on the TV screen and go, whoa, look at this guy, look at number 8. And then 7 or 8 years later, their sons and daughters are playing the game. It's going to be interesting to see 7 or 8 years from now what kind of impact some of these initiatives have had on the Black and brown community here in D.C.
So when your son said to you, hey, Dad, I want to play the game of hockey, was there any hesitation from your point of view to say, well, I'm not really sure, or, yeah, go ahead, son, give it a try?
You know what? It didn't really work that way. It was more me putting him on skates and getting him in the equipment. I remember his first day, I think he was 4. And, I put him the shin pads and the skates. The skates were this big. I mean, I don't even size 0 Bowers, and he put a stick in his hand. And I just pushed him out and I said, hey, see that guy with the baseball cap in the middle of the ice? That's your coach. Good luck. And honestly, he's never looked back. He's at the point now where, he's on the verge. He kind of has a plan. He wants to play NCAA hockey. He wants to play junior hockey before that. Went to a couple of junior camps. He went to a USHL camp and an NAHL camp this summer, so he could see what those NHL prospects and those NCAA prospects look like at 20 years old. It was eye-opening. It was really eye-opening for him. But, it's funny, like with everything, it inspired him. He came back home and he goes, yeah, that kid from Russia that looks like he's going to be a draft pick, I think I can get there in a couple of years. So, I hope it's, something that is going to help him, steer him through life. I mean, if I had to guess, just based on how much time he spends playing right now, how much time he spends thinking about it, how much time he spends watching it, I don't know if he's going to become a sports writer. He's a little smarter than I am, but I could easily see him find a career in hockey, even if it's, not as a player, it's working in a front office or coaching at the junior level, whatever it is. But I think we have a hockey lifer on our hands.
Have you guys had any moments where you didn't feel like hockey was being inclusive or felt inclusive to yourself or your son at any time while he is participating in the game of hockey?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly had names, hurled at me when I was a player. It didn't happen a whole lot. I grew up in a pretty diverse and liberal suburb in Maryland. It didn't happen much. It usually happened when we were on the road. But yeah, my son has run into it. There have definitely been a few times where I've had to talk to him and kind of talk him through some moments where, the game that he loved, didn't really feel like it was loving him back. Fortunately for him, it hasn't happened a lot. And again, it hasn't happened, around here. But, there was an example a couple of years ago. We were playing in a tournament, and sure enough, 2 times in the span of 2 days, he had an N-bomb dropped on him. The first time, the coach came and told me what happened, and I saw something happen in the handshake line afterwards. I saw his teammates react. My son was like, don't make a big deal out of it. I told the coach, I was like, we got to get to the bottom of this. It ended up getting swept under the rug, and that is something that the Capitals in their initiatives they've also they want to address is when these kind of incidents do pop up. They don't want them to get swept under the rug or quickly forgotten. They want there to be, a conversation, if not, a punishment, first of all, but also a conversation, maybe on the front end before seasons begin, with coaches and with players, and say, listen, here's what we stand for. Here's what we're not going to tolerate. You do this, you're off the team. And that's something that the Capitals want to introduce to the teams around here. But so, yeah, I mean, it has happened. It hasn't risen to the level where, it has deterred him at all. I think there have been some moments, like that tournament in Pennsylvania where, he was down. He was like, why did that happen? All I did was score a goal. I didn't showboat. I didn't ask for any of this. I wasn't, committing penalties behind the play or talking trash. All I did was play my game. But again, fortunately, it hasn't happened since. That was maybe 3 years ago. So he's 16, so I was probably around 13. It hasn't happened since, but I had to have that conversation with them, and we still have that conversation that these things may happen. Bring them up, talk to me about it, and we'll work through it.
Take us inside those conversations. What kind of advice did you give your son? I mean, to any other viewers out that are watching this episode and might have had that same thing happen to them, or a parent that's watching this episode and had it happen to their child. Give us some advice on what you said to your child, because clearly it didn't deter him from playing. He's still playing the game. He still loves the game, which I think is amazing. Yeah.
I mean, it didn't deter him at all. If anything, it kind of made him a little more determined. And that's what I told him. I said, throughout your life, you're going to have incidences where this may or may not pop up. And we're going to talk through it, and you're going to get stronger from it. Use it as motivation. I told him, I was honest with him early on. I was like, listen, man, your name is Tarik El-Bashir. I mean, you got dreadlocks, just like you did when you were a player. I said, you look different. You look different than the other hockey players. There are people who are going to treat and talk to you differently. You might have to be this much better than someone else at tryouts to get that spot. Be prepared for that. Don't use that as an excuse. Use it as kind of fuel for the fire. And that's what he's done. And again, like I said, for the most part, we also here in Northern Virginia live in a pretty diverse area. It hasn't been an issue within his team or games around here. But look, you and I both know it happens. And, I think communication is key. And one thing it really rankled me about that situation in Pennsylvania was it went unpunished. At 13 years old, that kid who said what he said to my son, he knew what he was saying. He knew what he was doing. That probably wasn't the first time he'd said that word. And to the best of my knowledge, it wasn't. It went unpunished. And who knows if he learned a lesson from what happened there.
Well, that's what I think right now, talking to USA Hockey and talking to Hockey Canada, and even speak with the NHL and the leadership there. It has to be zero tolerance. Right. We have to be able to document these instances that these things happen, and then we have to be able to follow up and make sure something happened. And we've got to be swift, and we have to be harsh, and we have to send a message. And yes, it can be a learning and teaching moment for these kids. 100%. When an adult does it and says it, you're out of there. Simple as that. As a child, you can make a mistake. I get it. But as an adult, there's no place in the game for hockey for you having those kind of feelings at all.
I agree. And, when I was talking to the Capitals about the story, about their initiatives, and I was working on that story, one thing I conveyed to them was, several years ago, it happened a lot in the English Premier League. There was a lot of racist chants and other things that were happening, in the EPL. And the EPL didn't kind of tiptoe around the subject. They had a very aggressive, in-your-face, end racism campaign. I mean, there was no wondering what side of the fence they were on. I mean, they had commercials with some of the best soccer players in the game saying, enough. We're not tolerating this. End racism now. I said the NHL would do well to have those types of commercials. And the Capitals are going to be putting out one here, it's my understanding, in the next little while, maybe going into next season, where they're going to have their players saying, we're not going to stand for this. This is not who we are. This is not part of our game. And I think that if you were to have the best players, I mean, in your face saying this is not right, you need to reevaluate your life if you're doing these things. I think that message is going to come across really strong. I also told them, you know what? It might take a little bit of guts, but put some signs up in the arena, in the practice arena, in the game arena. Whether it's Black Lives Matters, whether it's end racism, whether it's zero tolerance, whatever it is, it has to be in black and white. It has to be, something that can't be misunderstood or misconstrued or misinterpreted. It's that hockey is for everyone. That's what we're saying, and that's what we mean. Listen to our message.
Well, Caps fans, DC hockey fans are very fortunate and blessed. We're talking about change happening at the top. They have Earl Stafford, limited partner, Monumental Sports. They have Sheila Johnson, another limited partner, Monumental Sports, two the minority partners in the National Hockey League, Black-owned organizations running along with Ted Leon. Says he does a tremendous job there with Monumental Sports Entertainment Group there. And also you've got Neil Henderson, USA Hockey Hall of Famer. You've got all these tremendous people working behind the scenes, growing the game of hockey there in the DC area. And you've got yourself, Tarik, covering the game through The Athletic, a long-time Capitals hockey supporter. Even your family's been ingrained in the game of hockey too. I can't thank you enough for joining us today on Hockey Culture. Looking forward to checking out your updates to seeing what the Washington Capitals do moving forward with that new coaching staff.
Thanks for having me, Anson. My only regret was not getting to cover you for a little bit longer.
Mine too.